What ships were you on when you were Navy?
There were a lot. But, I was stationed on board the USS Constellation. That was my first command. The USS Kitty Hawk. That was my second. And the USS Wasp. That was my third. But as far as different ships that I was on, when I was part of the Amphibious Squadron 2 and the Land Fleet, the training commands, I was on your LPHs, your LPDs. Those were landing assault ships that carried the Marines and helicopters, just like the Wasp. And I was on your destroyers, your Arleigh Burke classes, your cruisers, your CGs, like I said, the different other carriers, other even the oilers and munition ships. I was on those when we would go on to do training.
On each ship that you were on, what position did you hold on the ship?
Constellation, my first one, I was what they called a burnerman. I worked down between the boilers, and we would put in and take out the burners for producing steam for the engine. There were several different positions that I held at each one, but the burnerman was the most prominent one on the Constellation. On the Kitty Hawk, I got up to top watch, and a top watch would be in charge of, in the engineering space you had a machinist mate and a boiler technician. The machinist mate was in charge of the main engine. The boiler technician was in charge of the boiler and all its support equipment. So I became the top watch. And the top watch oversaw, depending upon which side of the house you were on, at least 5 or 6 people, making sure that they were doing their jobs out in space, and in turn that I was in contact with the engineering officer of the watch, who was telling me what he expected from me. So I ran the main space when I was on board the Kitty Hawk. When I was on board the Wasp, I was the engineering officer of the watch. I would deal directly with the captain up on the bridge, and then I would relay his orders to the other 2 main spaces where the top watches were standing their watches. So I was as an engineering officer of the watch, I was in charge of all engineering spaces, both main propulsion plants, the auxiliary spaces, and all the support groups on board the ship. And I would be coordinating all of that. If I needed to get somebody to go fix something, or stopping and locking, coordinating drills, that type of thing. Those were my float commands. When I was at Fleet Training Center San Diego, I was an instructor, and I would probably say that being an instructor was my favorite. While there, I taught maintenance procedures for pumps and valves, and there's all sorts of pumps and valves, different types of classes that you have on board all the different ships. But there's nothing more rewarding than when I'm teaching one of the enlisted guys who's coming through the class, that when you see the light come on, he goes, "Oh, damn, I understand what you're trying to tell me. I understand what it is now." And that was the most rewarding thing, because I would have to say with when I was an instructor. Sim and Norfolk, I was in charge of the boiler repair shop. I had like 25, 30 guys working for me, and we would be going up and down the waterfront to all different classes of ships, doing all sorts of repairs, whether it's on boilers, heat exchangers, that type of thing, incinerators, replacing tubes, re-rolling tubes, doing brickwork for the boilers, making repairs for the inspectors that came through. back to that, again, when I was at the squadron and land fleet, we would go out on the different ships, and one, we would be inspecting them, making sure that they're meeting the minimum requirements for record keeping, that type of thing. We would train them if they weren't, and then we would train them on operation of the plant, casualty control drills. We would go on board a ship and we would initiate a drill, and they would have to react to it. They would go from, you know, like plugging pipes that might have sprung leaks to securing the boiler because there was a fuel leak, you had a ruptured tube, go through the entire scenario, and then they would have to recover from that. They would have to relight the boiler off or restart the main engine or a piece of equipment and bring it back to normal operating conditions, and then we would initiate another drill. We would do main space fires. We would go down and we would have lights that would like flicker with smoke, machines that would pretend that it was a fire, and they would have to combat a fire, and the whole ship would go to general quarters to do this. So that was a lot of fun. It was a challenging job. They were all challenging.
What was the purpose of each ship towards?
The carriers, the aircraft carriers, were forward deployed to supply air support. We had, while I was on board, we had the F-14s, the F-18s, the Prowlers. 14s and 18s were combat aircraft. The Prowlers were bombers. We had the helicopters. We had CH-46s, the CH-53s for moving people about. And we had the EWACs. Those were the eye in the sky. They were the ones that had the big flat domes on them that would fly around and just maintain surveillance over the fleet, looking for hostiles, that type of thing. And the WASP, she was an amphibious assault ship, and what she did was she carried a contingent of Marines on board, and we had the helicopters that we could fly them in on. We had LCACs, which were landing craft assault. Basically, those were the ones that floated on the cushion of air, and they basically flew across the water, and we would bring forward deployed Marines to the hot spots and drop them off and then pick them up when needed.
Anything special happen on any of the ships that pop out in your mind?
We were on the USS Kitty Hawk and playing war games, and late one night we actually had a Russian submarine, I won't say surface, but it came up too near the surface and collided with us, or is what they said. But we ended up with a, I think it was like a 70-foot gash in our hull on the forward starboard side, and in that gash, when we got back into the Philippines, they found a piece of the Russian submarine's propeller. And of course, I got sent off for analysis and whatnot by the Navy Department, but we got to keep a piece of it, and they made a plaque out of it, and they kept it on, I'm going to say it was where the quarterdeck was. They had a glass case that had, you know, all the ship's awards and whatnot in it, and they stuck it in there. But that was one. And I want to say that being part of commissioning the USS Wasp LHD-1, first ship in a class, it's subject to all sorts of tests and whatnot. And the neatest one, or scariest one, was shock trials. They took us down off the coast of Florida, and what they did was a tug would tow basically a 10,000-pound bomb in the water. And we did the trials, did the shock trial 3 times, where they started out so far, and then the next one was closer, and then the last one was close enough that the spray from the explosion, the detonation, was basically washing the ship over with spray from the explosion. And it's just like it is in the movies, where you would hear a click, and then all of a sudden it's just like an explosion, and as soon as you heard the explosion, the ship was rocking, everything was swaying, dust was coming down out of the overhead. It was a real eye-opener, and it scared the, yeah.
We see.
Need I say more? It scared, yeah, it was really interesting. I thought we had run down a picture. Did we?
No.
No?
We
Okay.
left it upstairs.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, but those were probably the 2 most interesting things that I remember.
What went through your head when the submarine struck the Kitty Hawk?
Actually, we were all asleep. Well, I mean, those of us who were not on watch were asleep, and I was up in my rack. And initially, it felt like a speed bump. It was like the ship hit a speed bump. But then as soon as that happened, the ship went to general quarters, and we had to all go man our battle stations. And basically what we were doing as a result of this was investigating for damage, trying to see if we could find out if there was any damage to the ship. And what they found out was that where the propeller pierced our hull, that we were leaking jet fuel out, and the water level, or the levels in the tanks were coming up because of that. So it was pretty scary. I mean, you really didn't know what was going on. You just felt the bump and then general quarters, and it wasn't until after the fact that we found out that it was a Russian sub that we had run into us.
Was the collision, you said it was about the war games? Like, what are the war games? Was it?
Oh, war games. We were over there. We were with, what was it? It would have been like Korea, Navy. Of course, several of our ships, our submarines. I think the Australians might have been a part of it. But what they do pretty much every year, every deployment, there was always some type of interaction with different countries' navies to simulate working together, what you would do, responsibilities, that type of thing.
So they purposely ran into you, or was it an accident?
No, it was an accident. No, that was an accident.
What was it like when the Wasp was commissioned, besides the shock trials?
They don't consider a ship alive until she's commissioned. And we were in Norfolk, Virginia when that happened. What they do is it's a big to do. They have guest speakers. They had several retirees, veterans that served aboard previous WASP there, dignitaries, the admirals, you know, just a bunch of people. But what they did was that they had the crew on the pier, and at some point during the ceremony, they say to bring the ship alive, and when they do that, it's the crew runs on board the ship. The ship's whistle is blowing, the radars are going, the armament is exercising, they're swinging back and forth, and basically you man the rail, and it was pretty impressive to watch. My mom and dad, an aunt and uncle of mine, were all there to see it. It was pretty good.